What is going on, guys? Naeem Al-Obeidi here. I am super excited to announce the launch of our new series, Blockchain, today. This is our first episode. And before we start, I want you to all know we're going to be distributing this show on iTunes Podcast, on IGTV, Twitter, Facebook, and pretty much every single platform. So feel free to listen in every single week as we interview the top crypto executives, influencers, and founders in the sphere. So let's go ahead and dive into our first episode. I hope you guys enjoy this new series of Blockchain today, exclusively here on Sniper's Tube. Welcome to our first episode of Blockchain today, and this is one of our new series here where we're going to feature executives, influencers, and founders in the cryptocurrency sphere to really dive deep and understand where their mindset is and really what's happening in the sphere, because I feel like so many people are blind in this sphere. And today we have Timothy Lewis to kick it off.
Hey,
our first episode of Blockchain today.
Super excited. Love to be out in the blogosphere. Good to have you. Good to be here.
100%. And if you guys don't know, absolutely. If you guys don't know about Timothy, man, this guy's got a ton of stuff under his belt. He's been in the computer science and technology field for decades at this point. He's actually a partner at DNA Fund, which is one of the largest venture funds in the cryptocurrency sphere. Also a founding partner at Ikigai, which is another hedge fund that you're working with. And there's just so many things that you're doing. You're advising like 12 companies and you're doing so much in the sphere. And really the point of this interview, in my opinion, is to really dive into your mind and get your understanding of the blockchain revolution, the cryptocurrency revolution, and what's happening right now and what you foresee in the next 5 to 10 years, because I think that's extremely important when investing in projects. Wouldn't you agree?
I absolutely agree, but I would take a step back and start talking more about the crypto asset revolution, not just cryptocurrency. And I would move beyond the blockchain and start talking about all the different Byzantine fault tolerant protocols that will be coming.
Could you explain what that Byzantine fault protocols?
Yes, Byzantine fault tolerance. I mean, really, what cryptocurrencies have been around since the 90s. Then I'm a part of the cypherpunk scene, cypherpunk movement. I've been so for the last 25 years now. And so we had different ways of creating cryptocurrencies, but we didn't have these Byzantine fault tolerant distributed ledger technologies. So it was really the Bitcoin when it was launched. There was Big B Bitcoin and Little B Bitcoin. Now the Big B Bitcoin is referred to as blockchain. But ultimately what the technology provided was a way to solve an age-old problem that was referred to as the Byzantine generals problem. So it's a long explanation, but ultimately it means being able to coordinate around a large network without an intermediary. And in this subject, it was about attacking a castle. Right. So ultimately, providing Byzantine fault tolerance means that you can come to a consensus agreement without an intermediary amongst a network.
And the Byzantine fault protocol is a simple way of saying a blockchain.
Well, a blockchain is a Byzantine fault tolerant protocol.
Okay.
Not all Byzantine fault tolerant protocols will be blockchains. That's why you have the existence now of things like DAGs with the Hashgraph protocol, and there are several others that will come out. I mean, this is a science that's now only 9 years old. So we will continue to develop different things that achieve Byzantine fault tolerance.
100%. Just so people can get a background of like where you come from in terms of your experience in life, your career, your jobs that you've had. I mean, what is your story, Timothy? Like what have you been through? What have you experienced?
I am a Zennial.
Okay.
I love the millennials. Generation X was the analogs generation, the millennial generation are the digital kids. I was born in an in-between segment. I won't give the exact year, so not to give my age away. But growing up like that, the first time I started working with the communication networks, I was working on 1200 baud modems where you were actually doing tip to ring, taking a phone and putting it on a modem that would actually use the phone for that to be able to communicate. It was really, really slow, but it was amazing. As a child, 3, 4, 5 years old, as I'm working on these connections, I found an escape. I lived in Ohio and didn't have didn't have the ability to go out to as many libraries, and I found getting to information. BBSs at the time were the thing. So these bulletin board systems. At age 7, I created my first BBS.
What are BBSs?
Bulletin board system was like a precursor to the internet, right? So the idea that you could communicate, you could dial into a service, and in that service you would have a terminal service that you could actually retrieve files or view messages, right? So this predated AOL and CompuServe.
Wow. So it was almost like LAN with Xbox, where you would play with somebody within your vicinity. So it was a transfer of information.
LAN was a later technology. When we were developing local area networks, LAN networks, was a later technology. This it was there in the 80s, but more so used commercially. This was literally being able to dial out to somebody else's server, somebody's box. You were dialing in from your modem to a pool of modems, to a modem pool that would pick up, and that person would have stored information. It's very much like you dial in now, or you actually get to information now via IPv4, whatever they are. You'd still have your network. You probably wouldn't have a network, actually, most of these things. You would just dial into these services, and ultimately, being on those services, you could retrieve information. So this it's 7, 8. I'm working on creating these information repos, right? So
most people at 7 or 8 years old, I mean, they're still with their parents, and they don't really have any self-awareness. They're not really venturing out and doing their own things. I mean, that's impressive.
I was lucky. My father was very happy to encourage my exploration of computers. So he spent a lot of money, and it allowed me to spend a lot of time on my computers because I showed a lot of interest in that, and I think it was an important thing for him to be able to encourage me to do that. But having access to information like that, I was dialing in places. You start locally, and you've got your local dials, but then they're not exciting. Then you find out I was in Ohio, so I started dialing out to California. And at the time, long distance calls were expensive. You used to have these intrastate charges. And the first time you get busted by your parents for a $500 or $600 phone bill, that's a pretty serious reprimand at the time. And my parents didn't understand what I was doing, but I didn't want to stop. So in order to not stop, I started really exploring what hacking was. And at 7, 8, 9 years old, you start to learn about the other networks that you can attach to and the other communication systems that you can use to your advantage just so I can get more information. For me, it was always about getting applications, getting books, getting information so I could educate myself with newer material, new information. Wow. And so learning how to create or find modem relays became like the big thing.
So really early on, you were into technology, you were into computers. What about if we fast forward to like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, when you start becoming more self-aware of yourself and who you are?
I had built an ISP when I was 13 or 14, right? So you kind of just moved on, and the networks were getting built by then. This is in the early 90s. This is in like 92, 93, and I started really getting fascinated with carrier-grade equipment and understanding how internet service providers worked and the networks worked. So at the time, you were learning about routing protocols, and you were learning about security. You'd have communications over, you went from BBS to news groups to IRC, and you would start communicating at these larger networks. And what I started creating a niche for myself in was routing, data expediency, and security. So understanding how to create secure communications for businesses and for some government agencies. So working on different things for communication protocols is what I really focused on, and data expediency from like 1993 or 1994, really through 2001 or 2002. I actually had in 1996, I decided that I was going to, chock full of technology and understanding. I was going to go to New York. I got my Series 7. I was a stockbroker. So
at how old?
At 18.
18 years old. Isn't that like the start in which you can get it?
I don't know if there's legal precedence. I don't know if there's legal precedence for you being able to get it under 18, but I got it when I was probably 18 and a half, so like 6 months into my 18th birthday.
Wow.
But I was working. I'd been fascinated by stocks, and I'm fascinated by finance. So reading books, from the age of 12, 13 on about finance, about currencies, about how they worked, and then about stocks and technical trading at the time was brand new. 1994, 1995, 1996. So I was super into understanding what those systems looked like. And then went out to New York and spent a couple years as a broker, which was a lot of fun, but at the same time, it was not fulfilling. So after I left, I had gone back and spent a little bit of time at a school called Ohio State, which was just a blast, but I wasn't getting anything done. And I moved from there to Chicago. And in Chicago, I started to work for some banks. So I started working on data expediency in 2002, 2003, started becoming super important.
So you've always been in data, you've always been in security, you've been in the computer technology industry, and you're really understanding of it because you've been in it since its inception. So let's fast forward now into today with crypto assets and blockchain and where we're headed in regards to this consensus model and the ability to really eliminate these intermediaries and what that really means in a globalized economy. You know, because right now we're very closed off between borders. So what do you envision in the future of blockchain and crypto? Based upon your past and the experiences you've had.
So really, a lot of my heroes and a lot of the people that have been fighting for this, it's about the freedom of information. And there were different times during this path that information freedom fighters have stood up and really kind of created the path for the potential of this new cryptographic law that we might enter into. The Electronic Frontier Foundation and the work that they've done along the way. There was a time there was an attack in Egypt. I remember that we were posting up modems, dial-out modems, dial-in modems that people in Egypt could use because ultimately they were getting their own internet service provider shut down. Right. Wow. So looking at, for me, it's always been about the freedom of information. So every time the world creates a better way to distribute information, some power that be comes in and stops that, whether it be the Gutenberg press, the AM radio, the FM radio, the TV, whatever that we've done, there has been a centralized power that's come in and taken control. And the idea of the internet when it started was that it was going to be a decentralized network where anyone and everyone could contribute freely and equally. And as we know, that has been manipulated. That's not the current case. We didn't necessarily build it with the underbasings of security. Like we wish we may have had, but ultimately the technologies weren't at a level that we could effectively do that at that point.
And that goes back to the Byzantine protocols.
Well, we didn't have a solution yet, right, to Byzantine fault tolerance or Byzantine generals problem. But also ultimately, we were creating, every time you create, you also use cryptography in creating private networks, virtual private networks. You use them in communications and a bunch of other methods across the internet. That took a lot of processing power to be able to hold those, create those tunnels, and that wasn't very efficient. So at the time when building out this network, the idea was, well, let's work on efficiency, we'll worry about security later. Right, and so that's really what everyone did, and now we have this amazing network up, which attaches to billions of devices on the planet, and will be soon trillions. And so, we still don't have that completely solved. And everyone said when you talk about blockchain being or BFT DLTs being a new industry, it's really not. It's just a technology that's on top of the existing technologies. Right, so understanding the networks first and understanding how that architecture works is important. And then adding on top of that some of the solutions that these immutable, uncensorable ledgers can provide is what gets interesting. So we're really at the beginning of that phase now, and being able to create new law is what ultimately I think the direction is. Right?
And you're saying we're in that stage right now, which I think is important for people that are investing. Obviously, this isn't financial advice, but you're talking about infrastructure right now. And in your opinion, is that the type of project? Because you're running funds, so you're obviously looking at projects. Yep. I'm sure you vet out hundreds of projects. Yep. And in regards to what projects to look at right now that might be here 5 or 10 years from now,
sure.
What type of projects would you categorize in that manner.
Yeah. So it's tough. I mean, definitely the protocol layer right now is of main focus, right? And the last couple of years, the protocol has been the one that's been most rewarded. I don't necessarily think that we'll ever live in a time where protocol is consistently the place that captures the value. So it's important now, but most things aren't being used right now. You can't use Ethereum right now. Ethereum, I'm sorry, it was a great experience. It's been a great experiment, and it's an amazing platform and project. But when you look at the actual use cases and the users of that system now, the most used dApp on the Ethereum platform, it has roughly 4,500 to 5,000 users IDEX on it a day. And the 100th most used project has about 3.
So it's just not being used.
It's just not being used. So we need to be able to create more user-friendly ways, obviously, of people being able to join these networks.
And you're a founding partner at Ikigai, which,
yes.
First and foremost, what does Ikigai stand for?
Ikigai is similar to a reason for being in French. And what it is it's the center of what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you get paid for. So
wow.
This finding your Ikigai is that center. So we have a great group, founded this with Travis Kling. Travis, formerly of Point72. He's a decade-long traditional long-short asset manager at one of the top hedge funds in the world. Travis is absolutely brilliant. He worked under Steve Cohen. And he really dove deep into the crypto asset world about 2 years ago. Couldn't do his job at one of the largest hedge funds in the world, told them, hey guys, I've got to stop this. I'm working on crypto. I explored that for a bit with them, and they are a big now publicly funded hedge fund again, and they weren't ready to step into it because, as we know, regulations aren't completely certain for a lot of these things. So he wanted to leave, and at that time, he and I have been friends for about 7 years. We decided that we were going to push forward and move towards that. And I also operate as a partner at DNA Fund, and DNA Fund is a venture fund. There's slightly different theories around the things that we're working on. Whereas DNA goes after some of the largest, most interesting projects in the world, helps them get funding, like Hashgraph, like Satori, like EOS. Then Ikigai is more along the side of protocol thesis and algorithmic trading, and finding alpha on these existing assets that are in the markets, with a small emphasis on venture. And venture is the side that I run, because venture is what I love. I mean, I'm a developer. I've been a developer my whole life. This is the type of thing that I love, finding these new products that hopefully will change the world.
And you mentioned Hashgraph, you mentioned Satori,
yep,
as well as EOS. EOS and Hashgraph being infrastructure projects.
Yep.
And then Satori is a project being built on Hashgraph, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So what interests you about those 3 projects? Could you talk a little bit about what your vision is for these 3 projects? Sure.
Yeah. I mean, EOS is absolutely brilliant. I love Dan Larimer. I think he, just where he's aligned ethically, he's a volunteerist, and that speaks a lot to me. And he's a proven developer. I mean, this is now his 4th attempt at a blockchain. His all previous being very successful, and that being BitShares 1, Steemit.
One of the best use cases.
One of the most used blockchain in the world right now. He actually has 2 of the top 2 blockchains are both his. Then the rehash of BitShares that he did, and now EOS. So EOS for me is a great experiment. One of the more interesting parts about the EOS network is the fact that there is a constitution. So you're actually entering agreements. Going back to what you were talking earlier about breaking down borders, breaking down law, these constitutions, these net states that will create the importance of what we are agreeing to by being on this network may one day become the new law for these communities, right? So when we look at there's a term I like to go back to, and it's lexicons of trade, and there's a lex cryptographia. So there is a very interesting term. If anyone out there wants to go down the rabbit hole, go look up the term lex cryptographia and read about what this changed, the lexicons of merchant trade, where we will be if we enter into this.
Can you give me a quick summary?
Well, it talks about the prior changes. Every time you have a radical change in trade, you have a radical change in law. So looking back to the merchant times of the 1300s, where we started trading with paper and what that meant. So think about this in the 1300s. Prior to being able to have a bank where you had a piece of paper that could represent 500 pounds of gold, if you needed to go trade for let's just say spices and ink, and you had to travel, you would have to bring your 500 pounds of gold with you, with your hordes of people, and those hordes of people, entering into any different land would definitely be recognized. You'd probably be getting taxed on the way in. Wow. You'd be getting attacked on the way the whole time. You'd get to your place, you would have started with 500 pounds of gold, and now you're probably down to 400 or 350. You had to employ 50, 60, 80, 100, 500 people to go bring this with you, right? When the idea of paper came through with this intermediary, similar to like the banking service, the merchant services, came about, you could get away with taking that piece of paper, crossing through borders with one other probably person to protect you, and getting to your place of trade. Now, when you showed up, the first couple guys that showed up and said, hey, listen, Sultan, this piece of paper here is worth 500 pounds of gold, they probably looked at you and said, you are crazy. This is the same way that we do now in the crypto space. Like, oh, this fake internet money, the magic internet money, you guys are crazy, right? But it's the same type of principle to me. It changed the law because ultimately you were able to go in and out of borders in a much easier way. So over a 100-year period, where as things took longer than to really change, the people that were aware of being able to trade like this were much more profitable in their trades.
Wow.
So there have been different lexicons that have come through. And the last one we just experienced was the Lex Informatica, the information lexicons. And now we're entering into the cryptographic lexicon.
And then you mentioned regulations earlier, and I think that applies to what you're talking about now, where regulations are uncertain. However, in what you're saying right now, there really should be new regulations put in place right now, because apparently the current regulations just aren't feasible for what we're currently experiencing with this revolution. So you're expecting this new lexicon of transition of regulations to occur now with this new cryptographic revolution. Is that correct?
It will happen over time. Those type of things aren't.
Where do you see it headed?
I think that I'm hoping that this will break down borders. I'm hoping that this, the better communication systems that we have, and the more that we can trust the consensus records of people, the more that we can recognize that cross-border we're the same. We are an amazing people. We are all human, and
Ikigai.
We are all meant to be together and not separated through these fake borders that people are putting up. So I'm hoping that that's some of the change that happens. I think it'll happen in other in smaller countries. I think that as people start to trade and are able to trade without intermediaries and without interference, people will be communicating more and start to recognize that most people in life are after the same things, and it's just freedom, happiness, and love of family. And so ultimately, I think that these systems can help in the advancement of mankind.
And I think it's a pretty radical explanation too, because dropping borders would then also imply that stock markets would crash.
I wouldn't necessarily imply that they would crash. There's definitely an economic change that will occur. Right. So right now the U.S. dollar underpins a lot of the world economy, and there are methods that are being taken now to change its use with say OPEC trade and the different oil trades. And if that happens, that's going to cause a lot of instability in the U.S. dollar. Now every major nation state throughout mankind in history has always risen, and eventually there's a fall. And I'm a citizen of the United States, and I'm proud of our country for some reasons, and I've been proud of our history. But I think that the founding fathers of this country did so to flee from a central bank, and did so to flee from religious overtones. So in that spirit of freedom, I think we are still fighting. So we're still hoping to try to find this resolution for all mankind. And so I think that for me personally, I think this technology can usher in a lot of that change.
And talk about resolutions. So we were talking about Ethereum earlier, and then we tapped into EOS. And I don't think, I might be mistaken, but aren't you the 5th largest block producer right now?
We are the 5th largest block producer on the EOS network. If you have EOS tokens, vote for us, LibertyBlock. We stand for life, liberty, and the pursuit of freedom. So this is I've been mining since 2009. I've been involved in again, this is my background, working for banks, working for technology companies to create secure infrastructure, and that it's been a great part of my career. I've now gotten to be the CTO of a publicly traded mining company. I've built many data centers. I've done a lot in that space, and block production and being a delegated block producer is an honor, because in the EOS system it's done by voting, by public voting. And ultimately, the hope and the goal is that the people that align best to the voters and the users of the network will put in place the ones that they believe are going to best carry out that mission. So we're excited to be number 5 now, and hopefully with some more votes we can move up.
And I was talking to a friend of mine who's working on a coin right now, and they were trying to incorporate EOS into it, and verbatim what they told me was EOS is a whole different ballgame to Ethereum. It's a whole different system. It's a whole different, this consensus model and this block producing model, it's not present right now with Ethereum. So in regards to comparisons of Ethereum and EOS, we've heard of some issues with EOS recently, and I definitely want to bring that up to see your opinion on that. But of course, any new technology, anything new is going to have issues, and that's just something that has to be ironed out over time. But what is your opinion on the comparison of Ethereum and EOS, and how do you think that EOS is going to affect Ethereum? Because Ethereum is number 2 right now, and is that going to stay number 2?
Sure. Again, I love the Ethereum network, the onslaught, what became now the semi-Turing complete block production networks, really kind of gained public awareness with Ethereum, and so that was fantastic. And the last couple of years has been about what does that mean, how do you do them, and launching tokens. Really the production side of Ethereum that's worked has been creating ICOs, but it's time for us as a community, I think, to move beyond just creating ICOs. And that's going to be to actually have usable networks with reputation systems, with identity systems, and that will be interesting and usable by a general public, hopefully. So EOS is in the difference between block production. Ethereum, anyone with any GPU miner all the way across the world can mine for Ethereum, and that's a great thing. I've been mining Ethereum since the first network that was brought up, previous to the actual production network. Now Ethereum, you talk about troubles, like Ethereum wasn't it wasn't calm seas, and calm seas never has a great sailor made.
I think within the first year, first 3 months, Ethereum Classic was born from a fork. There was immediately after. Ethereum Classic, the original blockchain?
It is, yeah. And that was done very contentiously, and that was done by a closed-off group of 3 to 5.
That must be very controversial.
It absolutely was controversial. So we have a constitution. It's a governed blockchain, and people need to understand what that means.
Could that happen to EOS?
So again, we have a governed blockchain. We can create a consensus amongst the users. Now, there was one thing that had happened prior to the ECAF being set up, and that was the idea that there were a number of accounts that were obviously phished, that were obviously stolen, that the people who owned the original wallets, the Ethereum wallets that had paid for the EOS, had been attacked. They'd fallen for someone's phishing scam, and that the person who was in charge of the phishing scam was attempting to recover their EOS so they would not have them. So some of the block producers, in its normal way of folding out, decided to hold their hands up and say, hey, listen, if we go live immediately with these issues, those tokens will be lost forever. It's controversial in the fact that, is it buyer beware? Is it the fact that you've lost your own tokens? And some of these smaller ones, I would agree with that. And these probably didn't need to go through immediately as it did. But it was a good example of what a government blockchain could do. Because they were able to put pause on these accounts, and then now we have a resolution forum, the ECAF. That is a elected position that people can go back and see. So because if you do get wrongfully have your account stolen, have your tokens stolen, being able from a business perspective or being able from an individual perspective to make sure that you have some sort of protection, I think is a good thing. So it's not code is not law. Code always changes, and in Ethereum's case, when that changed, you had a contentious hard fork, and in the case of EOS, you had a forum that was discussed about how this should be or should not be, and parts of the accounts were frozen during that discussion. So I think it's an evolution in the way that things will be managed.
And communication is always key, so it's almost like another form of communication. I know a lot of people are excited about the airdrops with EOS, and people are just ecstatic because you're getting coins for just holding the EOS token. And that's not something that is happening right now with Ethereum. And what is your opinion?
Oh my God! Okay, I'm glad you brought this up, man, because I love airdrops, and really what LibertyBlock is doing as far as, and I guess I'll announce this here first. I'm going to be doing a much bigger broadcast for it later, but I've got a document coming out in the next day or two about the airdrop scene, pure airdrop scene, which is one I like more. We apparently have to stop using the word airdrop. Apparently the SEC is hot and heavy for the word airdrop because you might be giving away a security on these things. So I'm very close with some of the teams that have been working on these. And if you've taken funding prior to dropping these out with no registration, that is similar to just giving away securities, and the SEC frowns upon that. This is again one of those things in regulation that never has happened before. And so we need to figure things out. But for now, the way it is stated, at least in the United States, is that they might have problems with it. So we're looking at different ways. We're probably going to call these things something else.
Pure airdrops.
Well, pure airdrops, again, is the word that I have been using. But you got to stay away from airdrops, because airdrops is going to be one of those just things that the SEC is going to tag. Whether or not it happens, who knows? Like, we were trying to get away from the word ICOs for a while, and that didn't happen. Well. But ultimately, I love this idea, and I love this scene. And the way that I really like it is this one-to-one pure airdrop style, where a community creates value through its belief in whatever the valuation is of a token.
Community creating value. Can you elaborate?
So let's just say I'm creating a new DApp, and I don't want to go. Most of the ICO stuff was built to crush the backs of vulture capitalists. We weren't able.
Vulture capitalists.
We weren't able to kind of allow our entrepreneurs to get funding, to be able to be creative, and then there's this valley of despair in all entrepreneurs' lives where you might have a successful project, but you're not able to extract any value unless it might unicorn. People have these preferences on exits that really tie the entrepreneurs, and if you might even have a decently successful project, but you might have all the value extracted by your VCs, and when you're done slaving for these 5 to 8 years of your life, you walk with virtually nothing, if anything. And so if you weren't a unicorn, so it's not a very healthy thing to do. For me, if we're going to be creating moonshots and entrepreneurs are going to get a chance, we have to have more of a participatory manner, and also the ability for some value to be extracted. Not all the value. I think that we went the wrong way in Ethereum at some points, where we had people going out and getting dumped $30 to $50 to $100 to $200 million, Tezos, on them, and not having any real responsibility. And then they were probably spending too much time thinking about ways to make other money with their new ICO money than they were actually about building their project or platform. So that's a problem.
And Tezos, all their funds were frozen, I believe, right?
Yeah, we can get in a whole conversation with that if you want. But it's important about any network, especially these networks, is building your community. And so the idea now behind what these pure airdrops would be is being able to create on the EOS network. So being able to create a product, not charging any value for your token. Let's just say there's 1 billion users say there's 1 billion EOS tokens on the EOS network for round numbers. So I'm creating a new dApp and I want people to use it. And I was going to then airdrop every user one-to-one based on the EOS tokens they had. I also have theories about not doing this not giving those to the exchanges that are not going to certify that they're going to give them to their users. So remember that if your tokens are on an exchange, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get the airdrops that you're entitled to, but the exchanges themselves will. They will. Right. So we're working with a bunch of exchanges right now, making sure that they are going to give those over, because it's the intention of the developers to give them to the community, not to the exchanges. So make sure if you're holding your tokens on an exchange, make sure that it's one that's going to make that you're going to be able to get your tokens, your airdrops. So in this model, say I've given out 1 billion tokens, but I also made an additional 1 billion tokens, right? So now in my total dApp ecosystem, there's a total of 2 billion tokens. I have not raised a dollar. I've not claimed that these tokens have any value. I create then relationships with the exchanges and say, hey, listen, I've got X token and X token does Y, and you should carry it on your exchange. And the exchange owner says, sounds good, we'll carry it on our exchange. Now, the EOS users, in whatever product it is, you have your announcement, you talk to everybody about what this is. It's open to go, ready to play with. People can start using it. And so the idea would be that some people think, hey, your idea is great. I want more of X tokens. And some people think to themselves, this is another crappy project. I'm not interested in this. I'll sell my X tokens. So then it would go in the exchange and people start to create a value for it, right? So if you can get more people to hold, the value might be potentially more. Now let's think about what happens if this token goes up to being worth a penny, right? On a penny, you have $10 million now of value that you've created with your 1 billion tokens.
Wow.
So if you need to go out and you need to hire new resources, maybe you have enough volume to where you can then sell 500,000 US dollars, if that's what you require or are required to operate your business. Right now, legally in America, you cannot pay people with cryptocurrencies. So if you're operating in America and you need to be, if you need to pay people to work on more services to create a better, more robust platform, you may need to extract some value. You may need to convert that into a fiat, maybe through an exchange, and then to pay your bills to make the project better. Now let's say you did that, and all of a sudden you have a much better product, and all of a sudden your tokens trade from a penny to being worth 5 cents a piece. Now you're sitting on effectively, however, it depends on how much you sold before, effectively probably about $45 million worth of value, right?
Wow, so you're allowing the community to create the value of the token. And that kind of makes me a little bit excited for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Just because of the fact that we saw what happened in December and January, and that was an awesome time of ICOs. Yeah. But now we're transitioning into this new field where it's going to be the communities creating values for these tokens. And I think Ontology was a pretty successful use case of an airdrop. I think Ontology did one on the Ethereum blockchain, but it allowed the community to create a value for its token by giving it away. You know, I had a friend of mine that was at a conference and he was rewarded Ontology tokens at the conference because they were giving out the airdrops, and that eventually turned into liquid capital that was able to be extracted. So that is amazing. And so to transition, you mentioned Hashgraph and Satori, and I know these are two projects that you are pretty passionate about, and obviously you've vetted out hundreds and hundreds of projects for your funds, and you know, these two projects are projects that I know you're excited about. Could you talk about Hashgraph as well as Satori and what that could turn into?
Yeah, I think I would say thousands and thousands at this point of vetting, not hundreds and hundreds.
Thousands.
And you know, we have a great team that goes through a lot of this stuff before it gets to us. But ultimately, Hashgraph, EOS for me is a great like public network, and it will be a great public network for reputation and things like, you know, I expect to see a very usable network, including the ability to kind of transition beyond just this public key, private key login infrastructure to where we have the use of the secure enclave chip.
I feel like EOS, just as a side note, it's like Xbox Live or like,
sure,
it's almost like its own community.
It's
like its own Facebook.
Yeah,
it's turning into its own.
Yeah, and it will be. These networks are. That's what that is, and you're exactly right. Now, when we have better tools for identification on it, I have very much high hopes that my mom will be on the EOS network. Because she'll be able to you won't be just using your public key, private key. It'll be able to log that, track that one time, then use your biometrics to access your private key that's stored in your secure enclave on your phone, and being able to do that kind of easily. So you're able to create things like reputation platforms. Everpedia is a great idea, is a great concept of where this is as a reputation platform. So that those are the type of projects. Everpedia, some Yelp killer should be on the EOS platform. You know, some of these type of maybe an open table type platform should be on these. These are going to be reputation and social tools, right? So I think that you'll have, you know, there's going to be attempts at taking over Twitter. I know that Dan Larimer himself is working on a social network. I mean, that's what really I think the EOS community will be all about. But Hashgraph is different. Hashgraph is a permissioned network. It's not going to be radically public. That being said, the players of the system are going to be known, and I think that a lot of the financial systems and services will feel comfortable riding on the Hashgraph public network. You know, when I talk about the networks, you look at Bitcoin and you look at Ethereum, two very large, very decentralized networks. They're great, but you look at the idea of securities and tokenizing securities on networks. One thing that might be an issue with that when it comes to regulators and jurisdictions is that, you know, if I'm trading what I've identified as a security on the Ethereum network, and I then trade with someone else, I'm moving, even if it's a registered and jurisdictionally compliant user to another jurisdictionally compliant user, say that block is confirmed by a block producer in North Korea or Venezuela, somewhere where we have trade sanctions against. I think that the SEC will have problems with things like that.
Wow.
Right. So when you look at some of the larger financial institutions and the countries and the compliance within countries that they have to work with, because you're still going to have to, as the law changes, you're still going to be modified to making sure you're compliant with existing law. I think that a network like Hashgraph, which is incredibly fast, incredibly permissioned network, the organizations, some of the large organizations that are in the current financial system will feel more comfortable using that.
And permission versus permissionless is pretty much, for you to be on Hashgraph, you have to have permission to build on it.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting concept, because
Yep.
do you feel like there's some form of centralized authority there?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, this is I think that there is, you know, there is decentralization. It is untrusted partners that can exist on this thing, and they can agree to this network content, like the understanding that the state is not going to be changed. So there are parts that are great. The whole movement doesn't need to be everything is decentralized.
Absolutely. That's Ethereum's issue.
Yeah,
no scalability.
Right, and so the idea that, you know, these will be transitionary networks. You know, maybe in the future we break down all the walls and there's no borders anywhere, and you don't have to have compliance with anything, and we finally come to these. The chances of that happening, I view as pretty slim. So we're going to have some networks that will do different things. I'm a huge fan, again, I'm a cypherpunk through and through. I'm a huge fan of breaking systems down, and the idea that these decentralized networks will come, and that's great. But I do believe that there's a transitionary period of time. And I think that networks like Hashgraph will do well in some of the technologies that usher that transition. So there will be, again, I think from a large enterprise and large financial institution enterprise, a big push towards the Hashgraph network.
A buddy of yours is the one starting Satori, right?
Satori is a decentralized AI mesh. It is one of the scariest and most exciting platforms.
Tell us about Satori.
I've seen. So it's currently running. Satori is the product from the founders of Machine Zone. Machine Zone is one of the most profitable video game companies in history. They've created 2 games that have done revenue over $1 billion. Their latest game, Game of War, is one of the most popular mobile games that exists. They did about 6.5 million in revenue, 6.5 billion in revenue. Last year. Yeah. So they created this engine. They created this stateless database, communication protocol engine, to allow them to create these games. These games are these ever expansive. There's no limit on the number of users. Every person in the world can get on Game of War, right, because of the way that the technology is built. And they created this out of a communication protocol and allowed them to use atomic broadcast and message ordering in a new and unique way for massive amounts of users, and then now massive amounts of data, structured and unstructured data. So this engine was first used for a chat room, then through these games, and then they decided that they could create sentiment analysis on Twitter using the entire Twitter fire hose. This engine crunches through any information. Right now it can read and interpret up to 500 million messages a second.
Wow.
And what they do is they have all these AI bots that then figure out what to do with these messages. So you throw 500 million messages, and I'm talking about, this could be 500 million video camera feeds, live video camera feeds. So, and then they'd have AI bots that can deconstruct object recognition and facial recognition on all of these feeds at the same time.
Wow.
So they're using it now for smart cities. They launched a program in Auckland, New Zealand, and they have all the cabs, the buses, the trains, the police cars, the street lights, the street cameras, all focused at Satori, and Satori allows the community to have a real-time understanding of everything that's going on, and then they were able to build applications on top of that, like ride sharing. So you have much better engines for traffic control and understanding where people should be moving. So this is a great system. Ideally, the people that are working on that I know and trust, Gabe Leiden, there will be building in, for me what's important are things like self-sovereign identity. Making sure that when we do have systems like this, because we will be going towards systems that will immediately be able to identify you. Right now with our phones, with the data collection that's occurring, there's so much data being built up on us individually. We don't have any control of that. We need to own our data. We need to be the ones that are asked whether or not our data is accessed by anyone for any reason. Whether it's medical records or whether or not you're trying to figure out whether or not you want to sell me something. Based on
that's a thought
where I've been. So self-sovereign identity has to, we have to be pushing for this, and especially when it's going to come to these systems that are going to have us videoed at all times. So the idea that no one should be able to track us. Currently, they're experimenting with platforms that are centralized that we will never have any idea who's looking at us. Like Jeff Bezos, Amazon has created a platform in Florida with a police department that does facial recognition, and we don't know who's accessing it. On a larger, broad-scale platform, what I hope for out of Satori is that we're going to be on. We're going to have a platform that we have self-sovereign identity to be able to use, to be able to identify, to where if they are using this for radical. This frictionless life concept that Gabe talks about, that we can still be the owners of our identity. If anyone wants to access who we are, say it's an illegal reason, say there's a suspect that's believed to have committed a crime and they need to find out who that is, we need to make sure that we have the proper things in place to where we know that there's a warrant that's been issued, we know what judge has signed for this, and we know that these things have been written into an immutable chain so people can't abuse them.
Wow. In terms of privacy, what's your thought on privacy? Because it feels like this is just a complete breach of privacy. How do you think we can allow a system like Satori to be actually usable, but also allow individuals like you and I to feel safe?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say that you're not running, and it's also not the only use for Satori. It's going to be used as a massive worldwide decentralized order book, which is the first use case for it that'll go public. But from a privacy standpoint, we exist right now largely in a world without privacy, without ownership. Again, this goes back to the self-sovereign identity and owning your data side of things. As we get more towards these these networks that we agree to be on, the use of their technology will matter in what parts of the world that you're in. If you live in a part of the world that does not want to give you access or doesn't care, people will build systems that lock you out, and you have no ownership of the data that will underlie your identification. But if we are pushing towards this world, we need to educate people about self-sovereign identity and being able to own any data that's attached to your identity on any network. And so that's for me the privacy aspect of it. And prior to these Byzantine fault-tolerant distributed ledgers, we really had no way to certify, guarantee, to understand that this is that we could have ownership of this now, and that these public networks could be done so in a way that it wasn't trusting an intermediary. So this is something that is probably one of the largest advancements because of this technology, that we now will have the ability to own this and own it outright as individuals.
Well, that's huge.
It is.
And with projects with Satori, 500 million transactions per second. I think Visa does 7,000 transactions per second
up
now.
to 50,000, yeah.
Up to 50,000, but 500 million. I mean, to think about the use case of that.
Well, it's not going to be a protocol, right? So it's actually going to write, when it writes to a distributed ledger, they're attempting a stateless consensus model, but they will write to a ledger off of their system. That's where Hashgraph comes in. So Hashgraph should be able to handle up to about 500,000 to 1 million transactions per second, and so they will publish to that in the consensus.
Which is still impressive.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's gonna be super rad.
And that's why it's almost fine for it to be centralized, because at the end of the day, it's something that needs to have some sort of oversee, and it's a new concept, a new technology, and it's a transition period. And it's just like any other transition period where it has to start centralized before going decentralized, in my opinion. So other than that, let's talk about some basic questions. Maybe people might want to know what's on your mind in regards to projects that you might be bullish on, that are currently on CoinMarketCap, for example. Are there any projects that might
I will say, I'm always bullish on Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is the only true currency, and I think that EOS, as we mentioned before, I think EOS is a fantastic platform. I try not to get too involved in on the side of speculation. I just know the systems that I want to use myself. Right, so I get super excited about where EOS is going to be during the next couple of months because of all the projects that I see that are building on top of EOS, meaning that I will want to have more EOS so I can use them. And so that's what I get super excited about. Other than that, there's not really too many existing projects that I am in love with.
And I like that answer, because in 2000, with the .com boom, there were thousands of companies just arising out of nowhere. And you look now at the companies that have survived, and there's only a handful. I can probably count it with one hand how many companies are still around. Facebook, Google, and these large companies that did make it through. And I think that's a confident answer to say, hey, EOS is a project I'm excited about. But other than that, I don't see much value elsewhere in terms of the long term. And I think it's interesting to ask an individual like you, because you've seen so many different transition periods, since the 90s, since the 2000s. You've been through this. You know what projects, I think you have a sense of intuition that most people don't have. And I think that's interesting. To kind of go into more of the investment side of things and your personal philosophies, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years focusing on in regards to all of your funds, the projects that you're advising, and the team that you're currently managing? Where do you see your personal focus in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I've kind of created this CTO as a service role that I've been able to build a team around and then go into some of these projects. We're exposed now to some of the most interesting projects in the world. DNA helps a lot with the broker-dealer on some of the larger raises. The smaller side of things, Ikigai helps try to identify and cultivate these technologies into where then they can get into a larger public eye. So I have a very technical team that I go and I roll in with, and then I start working on the technology, working on the vision, and I love doing that. So there are a number of different projects along that line that I'm more excited about. I mean, there's no math that's safe. Everything that we've known is being attacked right now. And as it should. You know, we've been only on a collective network as humans for the last 30 years, and more people are adding to this network, which means we get more and more information. So the scientific communities, the theoretical math computations and labs are just only increasing, and now you'll see a bunch of these breakthroughs for some pretty major technologies, whether they be search and sort algorithms that are going to change the speed at which we can actually analyze. We're just going to have so much come to so many new understandings 100%. In the next decade. So I'm just super excited for it, man. Just happy to be working with some of the smartest people I think in the planet. Trying to make sure that they're ethically aligned, trying to make sure that they're doing things for the betterment of mankind and not just for greed. So just happy to be steering the ship and a steward of technology and one of the most exciting times. So I get excited about the young crews that go through and are getting excited about these things. And you're right. I mean, I've lived through a lot of this change, but with age comes wisdom, and making sure that the people that are building these things, whether they're veterans or younger, are just doing them while understanding the past mistakes that we've had, and hopefully with the idealism that I think resonates in the millennials. And with the intentions. I mean, I'm super excited about the millennial generation. I mean, I think your generation is sick of all the bullshit, and they got dealt such a shit hand, but they smiled through it. And now that they're building their own systems and their own things, they're just doing them with honor and with intention. And that's just something I'm super proud of. Knowing that these kids were all knowing that everyone was on these networks and talking and communicating. And I believe that that your generation has really kind of honed into to understanding that humanity and compassion and empathy are things, experience and travel are things that are so much more important than hoarding and greed. So I have a lot of hope for that, and watching it all grow in has just been super exciting.
And I think people look at our generation, and some of them will call us lazy, some of them will call us unambitious, but it's interesting you mention the millennials, because it's almost as if it's not the fact that we're lazy, but we're just tired of doing these systematic things that have never really allowed us to progress.
Yeah.
And we're only trying to focus on the things that we truly love and the things that we feel passionate about, the things that we feel can just allow time to just go by.
Yeah.
And I think pursuing that, and then also attaching data to it, and then knowing that data can be monetized, and knowing that we can now have this, world of less intermediaries, it's allowing us to really become more of this holistic, not country, but earth.
Organism. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, everyone on this planet together is this one being. And I think that you're right. I mean, going through the periods of life that we've existed as debt slaves or as slaves. I mean, it's great to see that there is an entire generation that's standing up and saying no thank you to that option, and creating different ways to have happiness, and understand that you can be, there's many people that go out and they get their 6-figure job, they get their 7-figure job, and they're just completely unhappy. They work the whole time. It's not much of a life if you're waking up at 6 doing something you despise for 12 to 16 hours, and rinse, repeat, and do it over again for 355 days of the year. That doesn't sound like a life I want to live. I'd much rather, in whatever happiness that is, find a community that's going to allow me to do the things that I flourish at and that I love doing and that are super impactful. I completely disagree with the thought that millennials are lazy. Millennials do more than the previous generation. I think that they're really driven to be creative, and I think this creative skills, especially as we get into this period where we're going to have robotics and AI, that for a long time we're going to handle these vertical jobs. It's going to remove the need for those without the creativity. So we have to move into this situation where I think that creativity and design, I think, are two of the most important aspects of how we separate ourselves from the robots before we integrate ourselves with the robots.
I love it. And, you know, I think the coolest thing about all of this, Timothy, is the fact that you're really passionate about this. And, you know, I really want to just take this moment and say thank you for all of the work that you're doing in this industry, you know, working with LibertyBlock. So if you guys don't know LibertyBlock, that's his, you know, that's his baby. So make sure that you check that out and
vote LibertyBlock, libertyblock.io.
Libertyblock.io. So make sure you guys check that out. And also Ikigai, DNA Fund. I mean, these are some awesome projects. Where could people find you? Where could people maybe even contribute? I mean, are there any sort of
Ikigai.fund is our website.
And how do you spell Ikigai?
Ikigai.
Okay.
.fund. I don't do as much. I really don't tweet. My partner Travis Kling tweets. I do not. Now I'll be doing more YouTube stuff for LibertyBlock. I'll be talking a little bit more about that. I do a lot of the conference circuit. I'll be in South Korea the end of next week. I'll be in Macau. I'll be in Hong Kong. Then I'll be in Thailand and Bangkok at the Alpha Exchange conference. Then I'll be in Las Vegas, Mandalay Bay, August, I think it's 15th, 16th, the Chain Exchange, the conference there. Then I'll be in Chicago. There's a Voice of Disruption conference in Chicago. And then I will be going back home to Burning Man. So if you guys are around the Burn, check out Camp Epic, and we'll be doing it up.
That is amazing.
Online and about, man. Thank you for having me. If anyone has any questions, just reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Timothy.
Yeah, brother.